So, title of this talk is, as you can see, defining technologies, which definitions of AI should policymakers use? If you're at all involved in AI policy discussions, you've definitely heard someone say something like, well, what do we really mean by AI specifically? Or actually, AI can be defined in many different ways. The legal definitions that we use, as well as the technical ones or the informal ones, are very important because what they do is shape the scope of the conversations that we have. In a legal context, it defines what things are scoped in or out of regulations, in or out at things that we want to fund or do research on. And so therefore having those kinds of accurate definitions are really important. The subtitle of this talk, which definition of AI should policymakers use, is therefore a super important question, but if you are looking for a super clear, lightning talk sized answer, I'm sorry to say that unfortunately this is a trap. I do not have a super clear, lightning talk sized answer to that question, but what I do have to offer you is a great thing, which is a new resource from Aspen Digital, which is a handbook on exactly this question. It is called Defining Technologies for Artificial Intelligence, and it's a handbook that dives into these most influential definitions of AI with a policy landscape. And it is created by using expert analysis to investigate all of these different definitions, how they work, what they mean in practice for different lines of policy. So to talk a little bit about the project, this was a Defining Technologies team. It was primarily Raycom Statsky Show, led by B. Bella, with Churison, with very humble contribution from myself. And the goal of this was to create the first handbook that actually went through and listed all of these significant definitions. If you're someone who has ever tried to dive into a piece of legislation that has defined artificial intelligence, to or worse, you were trying to do a project where you felt like you should have a definition right at the start, you know that there is this daunting moment of being like, which one of these things should I use? Do I know all the right ones? How are they related? Where do I go to find the answer to this question to start? And so we said we should create this resource that pulls together all the important stuff that people should know when they are starting this. The second thing that we wanted to do was then improve the interpretation quality of AI policy by providing these definitions and make sure that people had good explanations of what the differences between these definitions meant for policy. To do that, what we did was pull together an extremely fantastic group of authors, experts from legal, technical, policy backgrounds, and each of these contributing authors you may, featuring the safely agenda here today. So these folks each of them delved into a different definition of AI and explained the different dimensions of those definitions. The reason you get into that is because this is kind of the state of trying to do this yourself. This is an example of the OECD definition of AI with the track changes version of how it has continued to evolve. Each one of these kinds of changes dramatically changes, perhaps, the way that this definition is applied in policy context or what it means to different kinds of people. So when you're dealing with these definitions that move through this kind of complex set of changes, some of which might be fairly subtle, this means that you really want to have different expert analysis for outcomes. So what we found was that the best way to make sense of this was to think about definitions in a kind of historical context and in the sense of these languages. So the handbook deals with 4 lineages of AI definitions. It deals first with artificial intelligence from the NDAA. This is rooted in kind of defense and national security and funding priorities. This one is very frequently the most just adopted directed at verifications. There is the artificial intelligence system definition from the OECD, which you saw some of the sets of changes that happened there. And so we'll review not only that definition, but some of its evolutions and changes over time. There's the automated decision-making system from the Automated Accountability Act and versions of pieces of legislation that use that kind of language in those definitions. And then the general purpose AI definition from the AI Act, as well as more recent pieces of legislation that built ones, like SOTN2026. So each entry is broken down in exactly the same way to make it super easy for policymakers or policy professionals or other people to try to understand these definitions. Every entry is broken down into these categories. Metadata includes things like where and when was this passed, who wrote it, who is this intended for, what is its jurisdiction. We include examples of all of the full definition text for all of these, so you're not flipping back and forth between a minute of resources. You can see that there are those writing entries. And then the expert analysis comes into these other sections. You get their analysis of what the motivations and a research into what the motivations behind this particular definition was. You get analysis about how this approach works in practice and how it's been received. Where are other places that this has been adopted, or what has commentary on its definition. And finally, all of them wrap up with some resources for additional reading, because as I said, this is intended to be the starting point. It's a place to go to make sure that you've got a good sense of the overall landscape, of how to start understanding each one of these definitions as you then maybe want to figure out how to tune them, figure out purposes, or understand more deeply the decisions. There is a digital version available of it today that launched this morning, so you can go to this URL to get a copy of the full thing. Freely available to everyone. This is broken down into those 4 lineages, each of the different entries, all of the authors. And we hope that this is going to continue to be like a durable resource that people will be able to go to make good decisions about how to do AI policy and approach these definitions. There will eventually also be print copies if you want to have a copy of this on your desk, and we hope to continue to distribute them to folks here in DC and the policymaking community as a service of resource. Staffers, policymakers, policy professionals. So if you're interested in following along with this project, maybe in getting some of those print copies or in the work that Aspect Digital is doing in this regard in terms of defining tech, please take a look at the report. Yeah, that's it for me. Thanks very much.